Hello, I'm David Mandy, President of O&M Partners, and I want to welcome everyone today to the Great Bear Resources Town Hall call. For your background information, Great Bear trades on the Toronto Venture under the symbol GBR, and they also have an OTC listing under the symbol GTBDF. I'm David Mandy, as I mentioned. O&M Partners, for those of you who are new to these broadcasts, is in the business of bringing public companies and investors together in real time. The information presented today is already publicly available, but we're hoping a frank, open discussion about this information will help clarify context and help you make a better informed and wiser investment decision. We usually have introductions here, but today we're going to go right to our host, Chris Taylor. Chris is the director, as many of you know, president and chief executive officer of Great Bear. He's been president since 2010, so he's been at this a while. Chris has an academic background in earth sciences. He's trained in structural geology. During his career, Chris has been involved in putting 3 mines into production, which is a very impressive number. He's run projects all over the world, but mostly North America. He's served as a geologist for Imperial Metals from 2004 to 2009 and put the Sterling mine into production. Chris also runs a consulting firm evaluating and valuing mining properties. It's a great pleasure to have Chris here with us, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
And I'm unmuted, and I believe my screen is being shared now. Thanks very much, David.
Absolutely, Chris.
Always makes it sound like I've done a number of wonderful things in my life. I can assure you that Great Bear is the most exciting one that we've worked on to date. So I'm just going to go through very briefly a few of the corporate points because they're less important for this discussion than the technical content. So we'll skip to the chase and present Bob Singh shortly, who is more or less the main event of this webinar with some of the recent results that we've generated. So without further ado, we'll move through the corporate presentation. We will be making a number of forward-looking statements. Just keep that in mind. This is exploration. This is an exploration project that we're working on, which means early days results, very exciting. But as you can see, if you followed the track of the webinars that we've had over the last number of months, you can see that we're constantly updating our models, information, and understanding of the projects. And obviously, we have to make forward-looking statements as part of that process. So Great Bear stands aside from many of its peers in the junior space by being very well financed and tightly structured. And we went into 2020 with just under $30 million of cash in the bank. And we announced that we were undertaking one of the largest exploration drilling programs in Canada. So more than 100,000 meters of drilling with up to 5 drill rigs this year. The company benefits from having a strong management team and board with technical and financial experience and a track record in terms of some of our key participants like John Robbins, Jim Paterson, of having some very high value project acquisitions under their belts or sales over time. So it's we're part of what we call the Discovery Group, which is a loose affiliation of similarly minded companies. And we benefit from sharing space and reducing costs proportionately. So the project that we're going to talk about today is what we refer to as the Dixie property. It's located just outside of the Red Lake District in Northern Ontario. And the Red Lake District is famous as being one of the highest grade mining camps in Canada, and with over 30 different mines and over 30 million ounces of high-grade gold production. So we're located just down the highway from the majority of the mines in that area. So it's a short drive, about a 15-minute drive, and that helps us reduce our operational costs. So Great Bear is very proud that over 90% of the money that we raise ends up going into the ground and generating gold results. And this was one of the primary reasons that we got involved in the Red Lake area early on, is because Bob and I have been involved in projects all over the place, all over North America, all over Canada, and we were tired of spending money on jet fuel and difficult access and in these remote areas. So the Dixie property for us was an opportunity to make a major discovery, but in an operating, well understood mining camp. So we've added to that understanding with the discoveries that we've made recently, and it's a very exciting point in time for Great Bear because this is the biggest exploration program in 2020 that we've ever had, and it's going to be the most amount of drill results that we've ever issued to the market. So we're looking forward to a lot of exciting developments over the course of the year. So moving along. Some of the basic corporate information about Great Bear. Quite unusual with our peer group. We have a very tight share structure still. So only about 46 million shares issued and outstanding. We have a small number of dilutables. These are warrants, which are priced between about 70 cents and $1.75. That's all that remains out of all the warrants that we've issued with the company. The last number of financings that we've done with the Great Bear have been unwarranted financings. They're just straight share issuance. So the last financing that we did a few months ago brought in just under $20 million at a share price of $8.35. So we've steadily increased the prices that we've raised money at, and that's kept the dilution under control. And we've been very fortunate that some of our early stage geological ideas panned out nicely for us over the course of 2017, 2018 and 2019, and this means that we've kept the share structure low, and that means that as the market cap is growing, the share price has performed very nicely. So there's two analysts that cover the company right now. One is Kevin McKenzie at Canaccord, and the other one is Phil Kerr at PI Financial. So if anybody's interested in independent opinions about the Dixie Project, the company, please refer to their research. I think it's a good starting point for understanding sort of the general view of what's going on with the Dixie property. And what I will touch on just briefly here is the projects are 100% owned, accessible year-round, quite underexplored. Over 80% of the project going into 2020 was still unexplored. Right now, that's probably about 75% of the project is still unexplored, and it's a big property. It's about 22 kilometers long. And oddly enough for us, the project is located almost like it was designed for mineral exploration. So the highway that runs adjacent to the property is actually parallel to the dominant gold zones. And I've never seen this before myself. I know I've heard about it. Hemlo is a great example. It's another big project in Ontario where you have a highway that's effectively initially was going right over the gold zones. But here we have the power line that feeds all the mining operations and the town of Red Lake and the highway running over our project or directly parallel to it. And that means all the drilling that we're doing, it's all within a few kilometers of that highway. So often our geos will pick up a coffee in Red Lake in the morning and drive out to the drill rigs. They'll be at the drill rig drinking their coffee about 20 minutes after they get it. So very easy to access. So, and what makes Great Bear, what makes the Dixie Project very unusual is a combination of high grade and near surface gold mineralization. Those are two terms that don't often go hand in hand. And this is something that's been a real driver of interest and a real driver of excitement for us as we continue to expand these exciting discoveries like the LP Fault Zone, the Hinge Zone, and the Dixieland. And very briefly, before Bob jumps into all the technical information, the next slide is something that I put together on a talk recently. People typically ask, well, you know, Ontario has lots of lakes in it. You know that the area can have challenging access. These are aerial drone images of the flat geometry or the flat topography of our property and the ease of access. So you can see in the top left corner, there's the Red Lake Mine Complex in the distance. You can see all the lakes that are around Red Lake. And when you look at our property, quite interestingly, you'll notice a lack of water. And you'll notice a number of open pit gravel mining operations and logging operations that are already on the project. So great infrastructure access. We don't have the burden of having a body of water sitting above the gold that we're drilling. And this is really a great project and a great location with great access in order to work on all the gold. So very, very briefly, the history of discovery on the project was effectively early 1980s. There were drill holes that were completed by Teck Resources, and these led to the discovery of what we now call the Dixie Limb Zone. Great Bear got involved with the project in 2015, ended up getting complete ownership of the project by 2017. And the first drill program that we did on the project, once we'd consolidated Newmont's 33% interest and a 67% interest from a private vendor, the fifth hole we did on the property was 16 grams over about 10 meters. This was a great result, and it resulted from our reinterpretation of data and using data to drive the exploration program. And that theme we will not deviate from. We have not deviated from. This is a data-driven exploration exercise. We have not cut corners on data collection, and by making sure that we do things like oriented drill core with all the drilling that we get all the structural information when we're exploring. That lets us, it's more expensive to do it at the time by a little bit. It's probably 10 or 15% more cost, but what it does is cuts down all the wasted time and money that you can get when you try to cut corners. And if we look at the history of exploration on the project, if other groups had just done what we did, which was carefully collect data, I think a lot of the zones that we've found now would be already discovered. These would already be at a much more advanced stage. So in 2018 and going through 2019, we made the Hinge Zone discovery, high-grade Red Lake style. These were high-grade Red Lake style gold in quartz veins. It's the type of mineralization that is known in the Red Lake district. But last year, not even a year ago, about 9 months ago now, we found what we call the LP fault zone. And this is a big structural target cutting down the center of the project for many kilometers. And this is not typical of Red Lake. So Red Lake is a well-known mining jurisdiction. It's well known to contain these high-grade gold and quartz veins. It is not known to contain anything like the LP fault discovery that we're working on right now. And what makes the LP fault discovery so exciting is that it's big, and what we're seeing now is continuous mineralization along kilometers and generally cored by these large panels of high-grade gold mineralization. Bob is going to show that to you in 3 dimensions really shortly. And I think with that, I'm going to step off here and we're going to get into Bob. You're in good hands. Take any notes that you have with the presentation. And I would mention to you as you're going through, there's some key questions that we're going to try to answer. And I'll talk a little bit while Bob is switching the screens over on the computer. But in all the marketing work that I've done over the last number of months and all the meetings that I've had with very sophisticated analysts, these are top level mining industry people and people that run large investment funds in the space. I mean, the questions that we're getting from these guys and even from the retail audience, the shareholders that have been with Great Bear for a long time or may have positions in the story because they like the developments, there's a few questions that we're going to aim to answer here over the course of the webinar. Number one is really size. So the question is, how big is the LP fault zone, or how big could the LP fault zone be? So Bob is going to go over that. One of the ways that we're going to be able to show you that potential size is by using some of the files that we've uploaded to our website this morning. There's some 3-dimensional DXF files that you can upload into whatever modeling software you'd be interested in, and you can have a look at the boundaries off the mineralized system along LP. That'll give you a good idea for how big the area is that we're working on. And the other one is continuity. I remember it was quite interesting when we stepped out kilometer after kilometer after kilometer after kilometer along the LP fault and we kept hitting gold mineralization. The question that I got most often above anything else is, how does it hang together? And mainly, are you guys exploring by drilling intersections between other structures and the LP fault structure? So basically, do you have gold where you've drilled it and not have gold in any other locations? So we're going to show you 3-dimensionally today that we have gold that extends over many kilometers, and there's predictable controls on the high-grade mineralization. The other one is regionally. We put out some results today, which are the first sort of regional step outs across about 11 kilometers of the Dixie Project. So what do these results mean? We posted them to the website along with the LP fault results. Bob is going to go over that and why we're excited about finding gold over an 11-kilometer area. The other question that I get asked frequently is, why do you guys bring up the discussion about the Hemlo deposit frequently? The reason being that we're looking for something that has similar geology, basically felsic volcaniclastics, metasediments, similar structural controls within a big or adjacent to a big regional deformation zone, and similar high-grade disseminated gold. And that's a focus for us because we don't have a close analog in Red Lake to what we're dealing with at the LP fault, we're looking for those analogs in other deposits. And right now, based on the similarities, Hemlo is the closest thing. There's obviously differences. There's a lot of molybdenum at Hemlo, for instance. We don't have that. That's probably just a function of the types of intrusions that were around when Hemlo was forming versus what we have in our area. But regardless, it is a useful analog in terms of having a big scale structurally controlled, geologically controlled, disseminated gold system with high grades that occur in panel-like geometries over many kilometers. So without further ado, those are the questions that we're trying to address, and Bob is going to walk you through our recent understanding.
Yep, thanks, Chris. I just want to, for those that are new to the project, I want to walk through a little bit of the regional geology, then I'll drill down into the details of the LP fault mineralization and the styles of mineralization, and then we'll have a look at the 3D model. There's a little bit of a lag time in the screen, so I will try not to get ahead of the screens, try my best at least. We're looking here at a regional geology map, which shows where the project is in relation to the big belts, the big greenstone belts in Red Lake. We have the Red Lake Greenstone Belt, which hosts the Red Lake Mine, of course. There's the Birch Uchi Greenstone Belt, and Dixie is in a bit of an isolated greenstone belt that's dominated by mafic and felsic volcanic rocks. And it doesn't have any age dates. We don't know where to place it relative to the other greenstone belts in the district. We're looking at a screen. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the lag to sort itself out here. But one of the things that's attractive about Dixie is the regional geophysical signature of the project, and it lies within this large anomaly. And there's two large scale anomalies at the view in the map that we're looking at here, in the view that we see. These anomalies are magnetic anomalies. They signify changes in geology, folding, changes in stratigraphy, changes in rock type, and there's two very large ones. One's under the Red Lake Mine Complex, and one is underneath Dixie. And this map just sort of highlights that both projects have a very large scale, greater than 5 kilometer wavelength to the folds, greater than 10 kilometer strike length to the folds. If you just looked at the regional geophysical picture, that's sort of what you see. And it's one of the reasons why we were excited about Dixie as a project when we first acquired it, because it had this large scale feature that isn't necessarily unique to Dixie, but certainly in the context of comparing to the Red Lake Mine, there's a large scale feature here that we're not seeing at other places here. Again, I'm losing my continuity here just a little bit. So when we look at the geophysics, the airborne magnetics do show the contrast in rock types. They also show changes in structure, and the image that you're looking at now shows changes in structure and fault patterns. And this is a cross section. It was a lithoprobe transect done. It's seismic data. And there's two main faults that I want to point out here. One's under the Red Lake Mine Complex, and one in the paper that was written in 2006 was called the unnamed fault zone. This is what we now call the LP fault zone. And it's a very unique fault zone in that it requires an understanding of the seismic section interpretation. And what you're looking at here is a georeference 3D sort of cutaway view of where that section was collected, where the data were collected. And the faults that are there are not folded. They're going right through a lot of the fabric. The light gray lines that you see are fabric that are reflections in the seismic profile. And these faults are through going, and they were active late in the history of deformation. They were probably also active very early. And that's a key understanding of what these faults are, is to understand that they're big systems and that they're deep rooted in the crust. They're greater than 12 kilometers in depth according to the seismic work that was done. So what we did was we took that interpretation of these fault zones and we interpreted the geology across the Dixie project to have the possibility of these types of fault existing across the entire property. And we came up with two essential faults, the LP fault and the North fault. The North fault has very little drilling to date, but the LP fault has seen a lot of drilling, and we've seen it across several kilometers now of drilling. And it was initially interpreted to be a deformation zone that's associated with a contact between mafic and felsic volcanic rocks. And We've since reinterpreted that relationship, and we've understood now through even through our basic airborne geophysics that there's a zone here, a deformation zone that's highlighted in the colored area on the map you're looking at. Inside of that deformation zone, the rocks have behaved differently over time. They're more deformed. The metamorphic grade is slightly higher. It approaches amphibolite grade. And the rocks don't appear to be, at least on the geophysics, they don't appear to be folded as much as they are in terrains to the north and to the southeast. And this could represent some sort of a major scale deformation zone. Structurally, it makes a lot of sense that there's a deformation zone here that has higher strain and a higher metamorphic gradient than other parts of the project. And it's interesting because the Dixie Limb and the Hinge Zone are only a few meters away, hundreds of meters away, and they don't exhibit the same level of deformation. And what I want to describe to you is what the folding looks like at the Dixie Limb versus the Hinge Zone, versus the LP fault zone. The LP fault zone is best described as a flow dome complex. The geology is very similar to flow domes around the world. And this is just a cartoon image of what a flow dome looks like when it's first emplaced. It's a cross-section view in number one. Number two, just ongoing deformation over time, erodes, uplifts, and compresses that flow dome. And then in image number three, we sort of envisaged that the whole thing was sheared, and we're looking more at a plan view now, where we have this transposition of rock types, and everything is flattened and sheared to the point where it's almost completely flat now, where contacts originally were near vertical, were horizontal and vertical. They're now really just all vertical and flattened and squished. And what that looks like in the rocks is really, really important, because it's one of the features of the LP fault that is very unique in the Red Lake District. The photos that you're seeing here on the left-hand side of the screen, we have the mafic volcanic rocks, which host the Dixie Hinge Zone and the Dixie Limb zones. And these are quartz veins hosted within mafic volcanic rocks, and they're very brittle environments. They're green schist, metamorphic grade, and these are nice veins. Some of them are broken and transposed, but in general, they're very, very much intact. Typical sort of Red Lake style vein systems in place during maximum deformation times. The LP fault zone, the yellow area hatch marked in the center, these rocks have seen a different level of strain than the mafic volcanic rocks at the Hinge Zone and the Limb Zone. And for the technical people that are on the call, just one example that we can give you is there are late stage mafic dikes over in the mafic volcanics of the Hinge Zone and the Limb Zone. Those dikes are all foliated and deformed inside of the LP fault zone. So it's telling us that there's another level of deformation that's above and beyond the mafic volcanics, the Hinge Zone and the Limb Zone deformation, and it manifests itself in the rock pictures. You can see fragmental marker sequences. These are sedimentary rocks that have been broken up. There's intense quartz sericite alteration. There's silica and albite alteration, as well as visible gold. In rocks that are silicified, and also in rocks that are not so silicified, a little bit of albite alteration, maybe some metasediments with some remnants of veins in them. And so we see different styles of gold mineralization on the property. We see veins, we see limb zone, replacement style bodies, and then we see what we call the LP fault zone, which is this large scale, a little bit higher deformation, and just a little bit more strain than what we're seeing over at the Hinge and the Limb Zones. And our original interpretation of the geology at the LP fault was based on very little data. We had just a few drill holes. There's very little outcrop on the property, and the structures are largely interpreted from magnetic data. Our initial assumption, and this is dating back to May of 2019, was that the LP fault appears to be a contact between mafic and felsic volcanic rocks. And what we've learned over the last 6 months of drilling is that the geological picture is a little bit more complicated than what we had originally thought. The property geology map as it looks today is based largely on drilling and oriented drill core, geochemistry, geophysics. The zone itself is interpreted to be a wide zone, in places up to 600-meter wide deformation zone, and is not necessarily associated with a contact between mafic and felsic volcanic rocks. The deformation, it's marked by an increase, increase in deformation, myelinitic textures, and an increase in metamorphic grade. You'll also note large volumes of metasedimentary rocks on this same image. We never saw those, obviously, in our early interpretation of geophysics, but we have determined the presence of all of these different rock types and different geological sequences based on data. And as Chris mentioned in his talk, we're heavily focused on the data, and we really allow the data to tell the story, and the data analysis really helps to tell the story. And just some examples on the upcoming slides of what kind of information we're collecting. We're collecting lots of downhole structural oriented core data and downhole geophysical data as well. They help us in our day-to-day interpretation of cross sections and how we're going to target our drill hole tomorrow. We also have new data acquired. This is part of the press release that was announced this morning, and this is SkyTem data. This is an EM electromagnetic survey that's conducted by helicopter, flies over the property, and basically determines how electrically conductive the rocks are. And when you first look at the data as it's received, there's some near surface effects. This is the surface representation of the SkyTem data. The red areas are conductive bodies and the blue areas are more resistive bodies. And the problem with this data as it's received is it's modeling lowlands. Wet lands, swampy areas tend to be conductive, electrically conductive. And so the map shows that these are conductive areas. It also shows in part the power lines as well, which are electrically conductive, of course. So what we had the contractor provide us with is a 3D inversion model, and we depth sliced this model. And this is a slice of the model at 300 meters elevation, and it shows clear contrast between known zones, rock types that correlate well with oriented core data. It shows resistive areas and it shows conductive areas. And this is a key element to add to our tools for exploration, because prior to these data points, we only had airborne magnetics, which only show you rocks that are magnetic and non-magnetic. And gold is not magnetic, so it's not a good proxy to try to find gold mineralization. Whereas the EM data, the SkyTem data we've collected, shows us resistive rocks versus conductive rocks. And the images that were in the press release this morning, these are two of the images that were in the press release. The important one here is the cross section on the right-hand side. And what we've determined from looking through depth slices and looking at the data is that there's a signature of the LP fault zone at depth, which shows that it's occurring within highly resistive rocks, according to this SkyTem interpretation. So in contrast, the hinge and the limb zone are in more conductive geology. They're actually associated with mafic volcanics, in part argillites, which are highly conductive for electricity, as well as iron formations, whereas the LP fault zone is associated with silicification, albitization, typically minerals that would make the rock more resistive to electrical current. And looking at the cross section, of course, we don't know what these unknown resistive rocks are, the gray text shaded areas, but we can certainly speculate that they're highly resistive rocks. Now, they might be intrusives that are really resistive as well. We don't know at this point, but it does give us additional targets to be looking for in the context of what the geophysical data are telling us. And remember, we originally traced the LP fault based on airborne magnetics. Now we're adding a layer of data to that, which are the EM data, which are going to allow us to look for resistive bodies in addition to magnetic contrast between rock types.
Frozen over here. It says our audio connection has been lost. So,
are you there, Bob? Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you just fine, and I see the screen
Great.
has changed now. Yep.
Oh, sorry about that.
Not a problem. So we're on to now just talking about the LP fault and what it looked like in May of 2019. So keep in mind, May of 2019, that's not even a year ago. We had two zones with anomalous gold mineralization, one that we had drilled ourselves looking for quartz veins in mafic volcanic rocks, and then one that was drilled by previous operators dating back to 2003. And a couple of key takeaways from this are that the anomalous gold zones occurred near what we had interpreted at the time, the trace of the LP fault. There was also some inconsistencies in the description of the rocks where we had drilled areas. We identified felsic volcanic rocks and metasedimentary rocks. Previous interpretation had interpreted those areas as containing silica or sulfide facies iron formation. And a description that was given for the area was that quartz flooding is uncommon and silicification has been overstated. We've since relogged, resampled a lot of those old historical holes and have determined that they are actually very silicified and that there is an absence of iron formations and more of a felsic volcanic and a metasedimentary environment. What I've done on this slide is I've taken those historical low-grade holes that were anomalous in gold, and I've added the results from this morning's news release to those historical holes. So I've jumped in time. I've skipped over the drilling that we did in the LP fault, and just for context, added the results. And I want to just show the significance of today's regional results. If all you had was these 15 or 20 drill holes across a property that span anomalous gold for almost about 11 kilometers, where would you go next to try to find the higher grade portions of this same zone? And given that the geology was similar in all of the red circled areas, some of them were quartz veins, very much like the hinge zone. Others had the metasedimentary rock package in them. They were associated with alterations, silica alteration in some places, and of course, anomalous gold. And so where would you go now to go look for the LP fault? Well, it's easy for us to say where we would go now because we've done it. But in the main area of the LP fault zone, what you're looking at now are all of the drill holes that have been released to date that show widespread gold mineralization and the relationship of that mineralization to those anomalous values. And where we're sitting today with our interpretation in terms of a model of the LP fault zone and where we want to go forward, again, the red circles here are still those anomalous gold zones, including historical anomalous zones, as well as the ones we released in this morning's news release, as well as a model of where the LP fault, and you can see that it's sitting outboard of those anomalous gold zones and slightly away from them, sometimes up to 100 meters away, other times very close to it. Now, we're certainly not going into the southeast area of the property and claiming that that's the zone right there, but the SkyTem data have given us more information now in terms of which direction the zone may be going, where the resistive rocks may be located below the surface. So we have a lot more follow-up work to do, a lot more drilling to do here. And given that those fence patterns are on 1.5 to 2 kilometer spacing, there's a lot of room still in between and along strike. And just to put it into context, the discovery of what we called the Oro zone, which was kind of in the middle of the LP fault zone now, the high grade hits there were only 50 meters from the bottom of the historical holes. In the Yuma zone, the high grade hits were in the same drill hole. We just extended them. We went back down the same drill hole and we extended them by another 150 meters and we hit high grade in them. So we're very comfortable that we're close to something here, but we have a lot of work to do on the regional context. We'll see this in 3D. We'll see that zone in 3D and we'll be able to talk to some of the continuity and how the depth of it looks like. This is just a cross section. We've shown this one before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it other than to say that there is a multi sort of zoned approach on the property where we have the hinge and the limb zones, the LP fault zone, as well as some of the other mineralization. And the core photos that you're looking at now, we've seen them before. They're great. There's gold in them. We always like to show gold with core photos. But it's interesting to look at this distribution of visible gold as we see it while we're drilling prior to receiving assays. And so I'm going to jump over to the model now, and I'll apologize ahead of time because there is going to be a bit of a lag issue here. So I'm hoping that we can correct some of that lag, and I'll just have to slow things down a little bit to make sure that we can all see the model in where it sits. So what I want to show you is the relationship between the gold mineralization at the hinge and limb zones in comparison to the gold mineralization at the LP fault zone. So we're looking at gold intercepts from drilling filtered on 3 grams per ton. And I'm going to rotate that view just a little bit so we can see the linearity of the gold zones at the Dixie limb on the right-hand side and the hinge zone on the left-hand side. And this is a 3D view, and it'll make a little bit more sense when I zoom out and actually show where this sits in relation to the LP fault. But I want to point out some of the distances here. The squares that you're looking at here, in terms of scale, there's a distance of about 550 meters from the top of this zone to the bottom of this zone. And this is the Dixie limb zone and the hinge zone. And there's high-grade hits within this. The spacing between high-grade hits is anywhere between 15 meters and as wide as 100 meters or more. We're just waiting for the audio to be fixed in case you can still hear me. It looks like we've lost connection again.
We can hear you, Chris.
Okay, it's Bob here.
Oh, Bob, sorry.
Okay, good. And we're seeing a lag in the screen as well right now.
Yeah, it's not moving at the moment. There we go. Slowly. There, it's moved.
Okay, sorry, I'm just waiting for the other screens to start catching up to where I am. Good, so I won't be able to spend too much time on the model here because it looks like there's a fair bit of lag to the screen, but I will talk you through a little bit of what I'm trying to show here. And what I want to emphasize in this model is just the sheer size and comparative difference between the hinge zone and the limb zone and the LP fault zone, which is going to show up now on the back side of the screen. Good, and I just want to show the difference in scale at that same 3 gram per ton cutoff of assays. When you look at the hinge zone and the limb zone and you compare it to the known drilled area of the LP fault zone now, and when I try to line up the assays on the LP fault zone in a similar way to the hinge zone, I have a little bit of a harder time trying to make those straight lines. And it's because the LP fault has such a widespread distribution of grade, and it also has controls. It has other controls that are affecting the way that the high grade lines up. It's not as simple as a contact, say at the Dixie limb, or a vein system which is following a plunge at the hinge zone, which is the farthest left cluster. It's more following stratigraphy and foliation, and it really is controlled by geology. And to really sort of drive that point home, I'm going to turn on some of the key marker sequences which allow us to continue to find the gold mineralization along strike. These are stratigraphic sequences of metasedimentary rocks, and the contact between those metasedimentary rocks and the felsic volcanic rock, which would occupy the white space in the background, are really, really important for localizing higher grade mineralization, and also to help to focus the lower grade envelopes of mineralization as well. And when I zoom out and show you what the actual model looks like, you'll get an appreciation of what the larger zone of mineralization actually looks like. and the continuity of that mineralization along strike. And the results that we put out, of course, on our website and in our news releases, generally we show values that are significant, greater than a gram over significant widths, or greater than 3 or 5 grams over 3 to 5 meter widths or narrower intervals of higher grade. What we don't show there is the envelope of mineralization at, say, a 0.2 gram or a 0.5 gram shell. And so these are important parts to our exploration strategy in terms of showing the distribution of grade, just overall grade. And within that grade envelope, we're trying to find zones of higher grade. And oftentimes we're now looking at 1 gram per ton, all intercepts greater than 1 gram per ton inside of the LP fault zone. And the key takeaway from this is, when I put all of the drill hole traces on, you'll see that there's just not a lot of drilling in between hits right now. And the spacing between some of these intercepts is between 150 to 300 meters from center to center. And the continuity of the zone is dictated by 2 things. One is geological continuity of those metasedimentary units, and 2 is by the envelope of mineralization. And so when I cut my assay grade to anomalous values, let's say greater than 200 parts per billion or 0.2 grams per ton, an envelope of mineralization shows up, which encompasses the entire LP zone along strike. There's a gap still. The gap zone here is the gap that you're seeing to the left of the screen. I can't really use my cursor because there's too much lag time to point it out, but there's really only one gap in the zone here, and that is the gap zone. And we're in there drilling that area now, but the continuity of grade at say a lower grade shell across the strike length of this is what is dictating our drill pattern right now. We see that mineralization in core. We see, not only do we see visible gold, if I showed just the visible gold occurrences, this is what drives our exploration. This is what the geologists see day to day when we're stepping out and drilling holes. You're still probably looking at assays on the screen here. They'll switch over in a second to just the visible gold component of what our geologists see on a day-to-day basis. So the criteria for drilling is, sorry, this connection is just resetting again here. If the host could have a look at that again. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, and I can see everything, and it's moving.
Okay. We're not seeing it on the other monitors that we have here that are seeing the web side. Yeah.
David, can you see everything from your position?
Should be red
Yeah, I
dots
can
on.
see it. Yeah, I
Can
can
you see
see
red
it.
dots?
Yeah, I see yeah, I can read it. Absolutely. I suggest we continue the discussion.
Okay, here we go. So what we want to show you now are what our geologists see. And this is what the geologists see day to day. They see visible gold in the core. Of course, we don't report visible gold as we drill it. It takes several weeks for the assays to come back. But they also see the alteration zone. They see silica sulfides. They see albite alteration. They see sericite alteration. And that's what dictates the drilling. And in order to find a gold zone, you need to have a reason to continue to drill holes. And it's not enough to just have a couple of specks of VG in a vein and then drill 300 meters away and have a couple of specks of VG in a quartz vein and say that they're the same zone. That's an unreasonable approach in geology to say that a vein is going to be continuous just based on the fact that it has visible gold in it. What we're seeing here is visible gold hosted within felsic volcanic rocks, within metasedimentary rocks, within broader zones of silicification, albitization, and proximity to a metasedimentary and felsic volcanic contact. And that's where we draw our conclusions on continuity. Geological continuity has to take first precedent, and then everything else sort of falls into place after that. The assays come back, and it's great. It's great that the assays come back and help us to determine that continuity. But the field people have already determined continuity of geology. And just I'm showing a couple of more elements of the geological mapping that's going on here. We have amphibolite schists on the right side. We have a sericite schist on the northeast side. And again, these units are very continuous across the property, and they're helping us to define the overall envelope of mineralization. And it's why when we step out in our regional drill programs that we're looking for signs. We're looking for signs. Have we hit the right rocks? Have we hit what we call our fragmental marker sequence, for example? And I'm showing now the text from some of the drill holes that shows that fragmental marker sequence and where we hit it and why we believe it's important. It's important because it forms the southern boundary of the LP fault zone. And that's why we continue to drill on the pattern that we're drilling. There were some questions about drilling cross structures and that maybe all we're doing here with our drill pattern is finding cross structures. And if I filter this back to say 3 grams per ton grade, and we just looked at the distribution of that mineralization, you can see that it's roughly following the contact. Oftentimes it's on one side of the contact, other times it's on the other side of the contact. If these were all cross structures at right angles, then we would have to invoke a structure at every fence we've drilled here, and that becomes a little bit contrived to think that we're lucky enough to drill into a cross structure every single time. So our drill spacing is very wide right now. We're on 150 meters. Some places we have 50-meter centers. Other places we have 150-meter centers. But the vertical distance between intercepts is also very large, 150 to 200 meters at times. And when you look at a long section view of, say, the central part of the zone here, and I'll allow that screen to rotate for you so you can see what it is that I'm seeing here on my screen. The distance and the spacing here is quite wide. And, between sort of given intercepts, the distance, between, say, those two intercepts there is 500 meters. And there's really no drilling at that depth, at that stratigraphic equivalent place between those two holes. Even the two closest holes here are 197 meters apart at grades greater than 3 grams per ton. And it just tells you that we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do to infill in between. And in order to find similar, we know we're going to find similar geology. That's what we're targeting. We're targeting geology. We know we're going to be able to define that geology. It's now a question of distribution of grade and what's controlling the grade.
And I'd step in and I'd just add to what Bob said here is that looking at the spacing of the drilling that we have now, it's amazing that there is no evidence that there will not be the same types of geological contacts and mineralization between any of the drill fences that we've hit so far. And what's amazing is, like, if you look at the strike extent of what Bob has on the screen right now, and you just look at the red BG dots or the grade dots, I mean, what's the, you're looking at more than 3 to 4 kilometers of strike length here. And that means that you could take the largest gold deposits in Canada in terms of strike length and put them along an equivalent type distance. And for us, it's very exciting to see the gold over such a big area, but the continuity of the gold that we're seeing over such a huge area in the context of our group of peers, which is these major gold deposits, this is what gets us really excited. So far, like Bob mentioned, I can't imagine that it's only on the drill fences that we've put in that we're hitting the grade. It's just not physically possible that that would be the case. So that question that we had about what controls the continuity, well, you're looking at it on the screen in front of you now. It's the contrast between those geological units, the big deformation zone that affects all of these units, which have opened up all the rock to the permeable gold, they've made it permeable and brought in the gold bearing fluids. And so far, there have not been any misses in the area that you're looking at. With all the drill holes that have gone into this area, every single drill hole over more than 4 kilometers has hit the gold mineralization, and it's occurring predictably at these contacts. That's what's really impressive to us. And Bob has popped up, when you see it on your screen, you can see the actual structural data. These are little discs, and they show you the orientation of the rock fabrics that we're dealing with. It's one of the reasons that we collect oriented drill core data. You can see that the data and the gold zones, the orientation of the dominant fabric and the gold zones is the same. You're clearly not looking at a cross-structural scenario. You're not looking at pods or chutes of gold mineralization, you're looking at sheet-like geometries of gold mineralization over kilometers. And whether Bob could actually take this off on the screen, I think he's showing 3 grams right now, but if you show 5 grams, 10 grams, you see exactly the same pattern. And it's these predictable gold controls, which are really a unique feature of what we have here and are really going to be a driver of future valuation for this project.
Yeah, and I'll just show on the screen here, once this loads up for the viewers, what these structures mean and how they are interpreted in the context of geology. And again, it has to make geological sense in order for us to continue to drill the fences that we've been drilling. We see the same geology, we see the same controls to the gold mineralization. It's why we continue to step out. And the fabrics that you're seeing on here are dominantly following the geology. There's fabrics on both sides that are rotating slightly, and there's a big rotation in the geology as well on the top of the screen here. And what I want to emphasize is that if these were all cross structures, then there would have to be one at every single drill fence. And it's just not reasonable as a geologist to use that as a targeting criteria. It would be just be an incredible waste of money trying to follow structures the wrong way. Obviously, we'd want to drill those structures this way if they were real and it existed, but we're not seeing them and we're not convinced that they're real. What we are convinced about is the geology, and what we're targeting here now is the geology, and we're actively now drilling into the gap zone here. We're also drilling at depth as well. And for those that are sophisticated and understand these structures and the way that they work here, I want to just show you that the fabric, the dominant fabric here might be sort of like that. And I'm just going to draw a parallel line here so we can see it. The geology is sitting in here in that orientation, and it's in that orientation. And the intersection of those two fabrics is really, really important for establishing plunge controls to potentially higher grades and also depth continuity as well. And we see that relationship in a number of places where we see fabric rotated slightly from geology. And we're certainly not unaware of these relationships, but we're too wide spaced in our drill fences right now to have a better understanding of plunge controls and depth controls to the zone.
If that proves out to be the case, it'll be very exciting for Great Bear because you'll have high-grade gold or higher-grade gold that extends parallel to the dominant geological trend, and you'll have another set of gold, enhanced gold grades, which also occur within the zone. So if you're looking for increasing the amount of high-grade mineralization that you could be looking at, it would be a very effective mechanism of doing that. So this is an exciting new development, and it's something that we're collecting on data as we proceed. And so I think with that, it gives everybody a pretty good idea of where our current understanding is. I would imagine that there'll be a lot of technical questions here. We keep having to emphasize again the scale of what we're looking at here. The Dixie limb and the hinge zone, which you're looking at as parallel or sort of like a satellite gold occurrence on the side. Collectively, if you unfold those, you have more than 1 kilometer of mineralized strike length at the limb and the hinge already, and they're wide open to extension at depth. It reminds me in terms of grade distributions, the fact that you have this sort of vein type mineralization. I was reading there was an excellent update a couple days ago, I believe, or yesterday, from Osisko's Windfall deposit. There you're looking at high grade zones that are developed. They have several million ounces that they're building out right now. They're, I believe, the only bigger drill program than us over the course of the year, and the targets there, very nice targets, and it reminds me of some of the grade distributions that we're looking at with the Dixie limb and the hinge. But what you're seeing within the LP fault beside that is, again, predictable high-grade gold over kilometers, flanked by these wide intervals of this disseminated gold mineralization. And it's hard to show. I think we keep having the argument on scale, but you're looking at something that's 4 or 5 kilometers long, and you're looking at something here, which is basically wide. As Bob mentioned, we're seeing the alteration zone up to 600 meters wide. With my background, I used to work for a company that developed porphyry deposits. These are sort of the dimensions that you see on these large, these large base metal systems, like a copper gold porphyry system, but we're seeing it in a gold system here. So ultimately, to give an idea for what the geometry and size is, again, we put up some of the DXF data up on the website today. That'll give you an idea what the boundaries on this mineralized system really look like based on the geological controls. And there should be enough data provided there now that if you plot up the grade distributions from the intervals, the highlighted intervals that we provided, you can recreate a lot of this information yourself and follow along in real time as we issue more results over the course of the year.
Chris, if it's agreeable, it's David Mandy. I'd like to get some of the generalist questions in of the people that don't really understand geology too much, as well as those that do.
Yep, sounds good.
I'd like to get to Q&A. Is that agreeable, gentlemen?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, well then we're going to start with a question from Chesley Morton. Chesley, question today for the team here.
Yes, David, and thank you. Always great to hear from you guys. It's always exciting. But I've got a stepping back and a very generalist question is, you've got a wealth of opportunities to drill, so many different prospects. So is there some sort of internal debate as to whether you keep stepping out to look for the next great thing, or spend a good bit of your time and effort in trying to go along that 3-kilometer area there with infill drilling and prove up a major resource?
This question is very close to our hearts right now, and I think you can see in the scope of work that we're doing that about 80 to 85% of the drill work that we're doing this year is based on this sort of definition drilling of the target that you're looking at in the screen right in front of you. And that's really the discussion. This is not a series of separate zones. This is one. It looks like a highly continuous mineralized zone that's like 4 kilometers long. Like, every junior exploration company's dream is to go out and find on a grassroots project something like this. We found it. So it behooves us here to bring in that long-term real value for Great Bear. If this concept proves up the way we think it is, the valuation in our minds, management's view of the valuation of the company will be multiples of where it's currently sitting. I know we've done well. I know we've done well over the last few years. I know it's been a very good investment for a lot of people. But if this hangs together and continues to track the way it has been, and this is the 300 drill hole 110,000 meter program that we're doing this year, by the time this time next year rolls around, and even every couple of months over the course of 2020, you should be able to see this picture come together. And that's the last outstanding question really for the major sort of players in the mining industry, is really how it hangs together. So I fully agree. The majority of the work this year is to show that we have a major largely continuous gold zone on our hands in this area, and that should bring in the real valuation into Great Bear. It's exciting to discover gold, as you said, and we'd like to see the extra blue sky on the project, but this is a core of valuation. We can develop the Dixie limb, we can develop the hinge, and first and foremost, we can add size, continuity, and flesh out this amazing discovery at the LP fault.
Couldn't be better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Chesley. We're going to turn to Doug Loud. Doug?
Hi, this is very interesting, but again, on the more general side, you're madly drilling away. But if you find some more good stuff, what are you going to do about permits? And have you drilled anything between the Dixie and the limb to see if there's stuff in between?
Yep, the permits, we're fully permitted now. Bob could question on, or could answer that with more detail, but effectively we can drill across the entire project, and that doesn't have any constraints on the amount of work. We've had very good cooperation and dialogue with the local First Nations communities here. We had a good sit down just before Christmas where we were talking to them about long-term plans for the project. So I think there'll be some more information out on that in the near future. But right now, I mean, we're permitted for multi-year, drilling across pretty much as the project as we need in order to define the gold system.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doug. We're going to turn to Eric Coffin. Eric, question today for manager.
Hi guys, great show as always, Chris and Bob. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that I sort of know the answer to, but I'm sort of doing this to maybe give the broader audience here the benefit of some of the things you and I talked about earlier today, and I touched on a couple of these things on something I sent to subscribers an hour or so ago. One is I've got a lot of questions. I'm sure you get a lot of questions about the gap zone, or specifically the results of ongoing drilling in the gap zone. I know why they're not out yet and should be, quote unquote, relatively soon, but you might want to sort of explain how the change in your reporting style and I guess a problem that you had with one of your labs has held things up a bit. I also wanted to comment and ask you about this model, and that's essentially what it is that you put out today. I think this is, I think the importance of this is maybe a little understated. There's no flashy numbers or anything, but I know that you're trying to address the other audience that Great Bear has developed and that will increasingly show up, which of course is institutionals and corporates, because what they want is something that allows them to come up with their own number, if you will. How many ounces might there be? What might the grade be? It's worth pointing out, I noticed that you actually put out 3D files this morning and loaded them up on your website. So that's essentially for an audience that's able to take those and do their own modeling, I guess, Chris?
Yeah, that's right. I guess I'll address the last part of your question first, Eric. So yeah, we need people to be able to reconstruct a realistic picture of how big this could be. And you can't do it just based on the, if you look at a table of assay results that we issue, or even we put out sections, drill sections in every news release. I mean, I often get complaints that the news releases are too long, but we try to be transparent and we want to show that continuity off the results. But the bigger that we drill this and the more drilling that we do, the driver here is really towards the growth of the company. And every company like this, again, we're in a very enviable position of having made a major discovery. I don't think there's any dispute about that in the market now. Right now, the question is how big? And the audience that you attract into a story like this changes over time. It matures is probably the best way to look at it. And, we've had a number of retail investors that have been with us for a very long time, and they've done exceptionally well off the Great Bear investments. There's no other way that I can describe that. But when you're looking for investment, long-term investment from larger institutions, we have, for instance, we have one of our biggest shareholders who have been very early on the deal and recognized the potential early on, and quite amazingly so, because they didn't have a lot of data to work with. It was 1832 funds in Toronto, which is that's headed by Rob Cohen. So these are guys that understood the big picture early on and began accumulating a position. We're starting to see increasing institutional ownership in the story over time because we're filling in all these gaps in the drilling. Like the entire zone that you're looking at on the screen would have been a quote unquote gap zone early on. We had kilometer-long gaps between every area that we drilled. Everybody wondered how it hung together. I'm sure from the outside perspective, it's so unusual to find gold over such a big area that it was probably seen with quite a bit of skepticism. We were skeptical early on as well, but we have a lot of holes into it already, and we're seeing this sort of continuity. So now we're trying to provide the information to the market to allow the growth in the shareholder base to accommodate both the retail investor and the sophisticated investors that want to see the burden of proof. And like everything else, exceptional discoveries like this require exceptional proof. And that's why we're trying to be realistic about the timing of having enough data to be able to generate something like an initial resource calculation. It's going to take us like a year of drilling and hundreds of holes to get to that point, because nobody in the world right now that I know of could sit down with the current data and give you a resource estimate based on the density of drilling right now. I think that's what Bob is alluding to. I know it is when we talk about it. So we need to fill it in. We need to show that continuity. It's great so far, but it'll be better over the course of the year if it keeps going like it is. And that's what we're doing. We're transitioning from predominantly a retail held story to continuing to try to reward those shareholders and bringing in the big institutions and the other groups that want to see that burden of proof. So I think that's the answer to the second part of your question. As for the gap, Bob, I think can talk about that.
Yeah, just really quickly on the gap zone. We probably a little bit of miscommunication on our part throughout the holidays. We actually shut the drills down for a month during the Christmas break, and we didn't actually start drilling until January 15th in the gap zone. And with one drill starting up January 15th and then adding another one shortly thereafter that, the process that we're going through in the gap zone right now is drilling off a cross section. On each cross section, there's a minimum of 3 drill holes. And normally the field geologists want to have the geology and partial, or at least some of the results back from the first drill hole to better plan the second drill hole. We're definitely going to drill 3, but it's, do we drill them 100 meters vertically below, 200 meters vertically below, 50 meters vertically below? Those kinds of decisions need to be made. So we've decided we're going to release those results by cross section. We need to complete a cross section, because otherwise we're just going to put out a cross section with 1 hole on it and 2 holes pending, or 2 holes pending. You know, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put them out that way. So it just takes time to drill. You imagine on one cross section, you're drilling a 400-meter hole, then a slightly deeper one that's about 550, and then a slightly deeper one that's about 800 meters. To drill those 3 holes takes about 3.5 weeks, and then the results come in about 2 weeks after that. So it does take time to drill, even on 150-meter centers with 3 or 4 drills going. We do have to really plan these holes and make sure that we're completing a cross section before we move on to the next one.
Thank you, Bob, Chris. Eric, thanks for your questions. The call has run over, so we're just going to try and get a few more questions in before we proceed to close. Glenn, Galata's on the line with us. Glenn, do you have a question today for the team? Glenn's on. All right, we're going to turn let's turn to Murray Vanderveld. Murray, good to have you on the line. Just need to unmute Murray, please. All right, we've got it. Great.
You got it now?
We're here.
Yeah. And again, happy retail investor, but a generalist. What you've been showing us basically is the 4-kilometer strike zone on the LP fault, is it not? And this LP fault is 11 kilometers. And your plan is to sort of develop this 4 kilometers so that it can be converted into a resource, rather than sort of doing the blue sky extension along the 20-kilometer fault. Is that correct?
Yeah, effectively. We'll just pop something up here up on the image, and I'll talk about something real quick. So the SkyTem data, the EM that we just collected, let's just give us a second to get this up in front of you. Okay, so what you're looking at is a series, and it's going to show up in your screen in a second. I'm just going to watch for the lag. We have another computer set up across.
It's coming in now.
So what you're looking at here is a bunch of trends, all of which have compatible geophysical signatures to the LP fault zone. And if you look at it, the drilling that we've got, you can see where the drill hole traces are faintly showing up. They're in the blue colors here and the white colors. White is very, very resistive. So there aren't gaps in the data. The white are the really good targets as well. So if you look at where we have the strongest, thickest mineralization along the LP fault so far, it's in a white patch. So if you look within the blue and take that along trend, I'm just going to work, there's probably too much lag to follow my cursor, but I'm going to follow some of these
it's working
all over to the east side of the project. These are all targets now. So all of this needs to be explored because we don't know what's in them. They could just be other formational rocks. They could be alteration. There's a number of zones here that could be viable targets, and they extend off in the other direction as well. So I don't actually know how long the LP fault is. So far, we have gold, this sort of halo of gold. And like Bob mentioned, when we first drilled the LP fault, nobody cared. And I have to say, the first news release that we put out about the LP fault, this was in 2018, the end of 2018, had these anomalous gold results from the fault zone. We began to try to understand it, and it generated zero market reaction, even though I remember talking to John Robbins, who's a principal advisor of the company, and to Bob about this, and we said, we're getting these like 20, 30 meter intervals of like 0.2, 0.3 grams. What is this? Why is this here? And then effectively, you know, we ended up in short order stepping out and finding the high grade mineralization. We now have that same signature over 11 kilometers. So we can't lose sight of the fact that the gold mineralized system here could be multiple zones. We certainly have the hinge and the limb, which we're not talking about much on the side, but these are in these sort of, you know, quartz vein, high grade quartz vein units. I don't know how many of those there are. We're starting to hit them in other areas, along trend in other areas. And now we're seeing that we have these big resistivity signatures across many kilometers and multiple targets across the project. So the total, at the end of the day, if this is a successful project and becomes a mine, you have no idea where, you know, the center of mining will be, even at this stage of work. I mean, I assume it's going to be around this area of the LP fault where we've been having such huge success. But at depth, you know, you have to realize that gold deposits can extend for kilometers vertically. If you see a gold deposit over 5 kilometers of strike length, a general rule of thumb in these things is that you probably have a similar vertical extent, at least, of what you're looking at laterally. So we've got a zone here, you know, that's say 4 to 5 kilometers long, this sort of central area of the LP fault. It's probably going to extend to very significant depths. The mining in the Red Lake area goes down to over 2.5 kilometers depth. So it gives you an idea what's possible in terms of depth extent. Well, very few gold deposits around the world outcrop at surface in an extravagant way like the LP fault does. So all these other zones where we see the resistivity, we see anomalous gold, we see deformation like we do in the LP fault, you don't know what's just below them in the surface or what's just adjacent to them. So we don't want to start waving our arms around too wildly, but the bottom line is the exploration potential in the project, if you have enough time to work on it, is really, really incredible. So I would just answer your question to say we're very happy with what we found. There's a lot of exploration potential, but to show that value, because we are getting a lot of scrutiny, which is justified, and we're very happy with it. We want to show that continuity. We want to show that size. We want to show, you know, in the future when we have more data, we'll be working on the economic sort of characteristics and viability of what we have. We have to be able to show that as a focus now, and we have to be able to show that tandem blue sky potential across the project. So anyway, I hope that answers the question, and I hope this image helps show why it's wide open to extension in a bunch of different areas.
No, that's terrific. And the last, yeah, you get me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
We can, Murray. Absolutely. Okay, thanks for your question, Murray. We're going to turn to Michael Potter. Michael, question today?
Fascinating story. What sort of borehole intersection spacing do you think you're going to have to get down to before you can get your initial resource?
It's just a guess right now as we collect the data, but as a first pass, we announced that we'll drill about 100 meters separated drill fences along about 5 kilometers and down to about 500 meters. Now, if you look at the drill sections we've already issued, you can see we've already hit gold down below that level. There's no doubt, like I said, if you have 5 kilometers of lateral extent, it's very likely you have significant vertical extent, probably kilometers of vertical extent. We don't know yet, we have to drill it. But, you know, vertically, we want to hit the zone about 75 meters apart vertically, you know, down to about 500 meters depth. So say 6 drill holes per fence this year, 6 to 7 drill holes per fence on that 75 meter vertical separation. And each fence should be about 100 meters apart. Once we have the data from that, there might be tighter drilling required in certain areas to just understand variation and continuity. But if you show the continuity across 4 or 5 kilometers on 100 meter centers consistently and down over 500 meters vertically, I mean, you will have established something that has very few parallels here in terms of comparable discoveries. So that's about an early stage estimate of what it'll require, and we'll get more information and fill that in over time.
So, yeah, okay. And with your drilling for this year, you have enough meters to do that?
Yeah, we have a $21 million drill budget, but including, you know, the extra cash that we have on hand, several $1,000,000 more than that, and money that we expect to come in from our warrants. For instance, there's several more $1,000,000 that will come in from the warrants. We have capacity to go all the way through into next year without having to raise money again. It just depends on how many drills we have, how big this thing is ultimately going to be. I mean, like, if we define a panel that's 5 kilometers long and 500 meters deep, you know we're going to define another panel that's from 500 meters to 1,000 meters deep. And then you know we're going to do a deeper panel than that. Now, I hope that we get to work on the project as long as it takes to do all that. But if it holds together the way it has been over 5 kilometers, again, there have been no misses. Which is really, really remarkable. I keep coming back to that. And we shake our heads all the time when we're looking at the core on the project. If it gets to that point, I don't know of another sort of system with this scale that has that kind of continuity. And that will really be something that I think will bring in a lot of extra value, a lot of extra attention. And then there are, as you can see with gold prices rising all the time this year, I mean, at what point does somebody decide that this is the kind of asset that they want to build a company around, or the kind of asset that might be able to produce a large number of ounces of gold over a long period of time? So I think the data will help inform that decision. We're not there yet. Nobody's going to make that decision yet, but you got to think where we're going to be a year from now. So it's going to be a totally different ballgame.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Michael. Chris, I would suggest we've gotten all the questions. Would like to turn to you and Bob for closing remarks. It's been a great call.
I tend to be the ebullient speaker, so I'll just thank everybody. You know, I really feel that. I profoundly feel a sense of thanks for our shareholders who have been so interested in the story. You know, this project was something that was in the back of Bob's mind for over 10 years, from the time that he saw drill core coming out of the project and noticed that, you know, it had to have been a better system than what people understood, because there was gold over kilometers and there was gold in almost every drill hole. So it was in the back of his head for a long time. And I've been with Great Bear for about 10 years at this point, looking for the asset that could really generate growth in the company. So, you know, this is really an example, and it sounds really, really corny. I don't want to have a hallmark moment here, but it's a bit of a dream come true. As an exploration geologist, somebody that loves science and values a scientific approach, we've managed to marry, you know, the tight share structure, good corporate governance, a strong management team, and a major discovery together. And we want to make sure that we get as much value for all of our shareholders as we can, because we're big shareholders and we want to see that value come in. So I've said so many times, you know, I don't want it to turn into just a market cap growth story. I want to see that raw performance on a per share basis, because that's where that unique benefit comes in. And we're going to keep focus on structure, tight structure, good science, and that process of discovery and now definition of this major discovery that we've made. So thank you, everybody, for the attention on the story. Thank you for being shareholders of the company, and we'll continue to do our best. We'll put the best science and the best effort into making this turn out to the best outcome that we can.
Thank you, Chris and Bob, and the whole Great Bear team. We really appreciate all the information provided today, and I want to wish everyone a very pleasant afternoon.
Thank you, David.